Today we had Stephanie Midgley here. Professor Stephanie Midgley is a world-renowned expert on climate change. She has won several awards in South Africa, and she is on the Western Cape Department of Agriculture's climate change program. She runs the program, and she's making incredible strides and a huge difference within the climate change part of the agricultural sector. And it was very inspiring to have her here today.
It was a fascinating chat about what they're doing for the agriculture sector, small things that growers and people can do to help mitigate climate change in the long run. And yes, stay around. This is going to be a good one.
So, good afternoon, Stephanie. It's really nice of you to join us. We really, really appreciate you making the trouble, and we've been wanting to chat to you for a long time. Would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Stephanie Midgley. I'd like to introduce myself by what my passion is, what I love. I love science, I love nature, and that is what got me into studying firstly botany and biochemistry, and because I always wanted to become a plant physiologist. And then my road took me to becoming an ecophysiologist. So my main interest is how plants in their living daily lives, how do they respond to the environment, to the soil, to the climate especially. And that took me into what is climate change and how is climate change affecting plants. So that's where my journey started. It's almost 32 years ago now where I started my first job as a physiologist. In fact, it was with the National Botanical Institute back then at Kirsten. Okay. And I did my PhD there, and I wasn't even working in agriculture at that point, but I learned my skills around how plants respond to climate. And then I was called back to my department where I did my master's, which is horticultural science, and I applied for a job there, and I spent many years there being a lecturer and researcher, working mainly on fruit, in the fruit industry, so apples and other fruit types. And from the start, because I'd had this introduction to climate change, I did my research on climate stresses in the fruit industry, how plants respond, and then how farmers can help them to adapt and to produce high quality and high volumes, even under those stresses. Because it's not an easy climate in the Western Cape to produce well. Yeah, so that was my road. I've been mainly a researcher and academic most of my life, but then 4.5 years ago, I applied for a position at the Department of Agriculture, the Western Cape at Elsenburg. And so I'm now a specialist scientist for climate change for the department, provincially, across the whole province, in fact, and across all of agriculture, not only fruit anymore, but including wine and livestock and everything that falls under agriculture. So that's what I do.
What an interesting journey, and that you end up now working for government after all of that, bringing your knowledge that you have and being able to assist our government with that. And a very broad question, how's that going?
I find it very stimulating because I'm a systems person, and for me, being a researcher doesn't just end in the orchard or in the lab or teaching it. For me, you have to understand how everything fits together, and governance and the private sector working with the public sector, that's interested me for a long time. In fact, I started working on policy, climate change policy for agriculture and food security way back in 2007, when the Western Cape was the first province to develop a climate change strategy. And I was the person in that team who was responsible for agriculture and food security. And that's where my journey with policy started. And I find that really, really interesting because I feel that as a researcher, if you just stick in your little silo and your little speciality, your peers know about you, but it doesn't have any impact on the decision making. And so I find now that in government, as in a government position where I am now, I have agency. And for a researcher, that is something incredible, where you have an audience immediately. You can bring a group of people together because if there's a trusting relationship, obviously, between the sector and government, I'm in a position to call workshops and get the best people around the table from government. I know everybody in government who's related to what I do, my work. I know everybody in the well, not everybody, but I have a big network now of researchers and people also in adjacent fields like the water sector, the environment sector, even the health sector, because all of these things come together in climate change. Because we can't only look at what's happening in the field and with the plants, we have to look at the whole production system. And so that really excites me.
And what we must add is that the Western Cape's Department of Agriculture is very active in these things. I don't know, how's the rest of the country's provinces, agricultural sectors? Do you think the Western Cape is...
You know, I have to brag a little bit here.
Yeah. Please
Go
do.
for it. Do it.
We are definitely ahead of the group, and it's not that there aren't good people in other provinces. I have colleagues that are amazing and work really hard in other provinces, but the capacity there and I think maybe even the political will to some extent isn't as strong as it is here in the Western Cape. And I was lucky that the Department of Agriculture in the Western Cape started thinking about the risks around climate change a long time ago. So I work closely with Dr. Ilse Trautmann. She's the Deputy Director General that I work under, and she in fact started the conversation with the Department of Environment Affairs and Development Planning back in, it must have been about 2011, 2012, because they're responsible for the climate change response across the province, provincially. So she started saying that, well, we actually need to look at this very, very carefully. What is the evidence, and what are we going to do about it? We need a strategy for agriculture in the province. And we are still to this day, our strategy was finalized in 2016. We're still implementing it. And we are still the only province in this country that has a sectoral strategy for agriculture for climate change. So in other provinces, you will have a provincial strategy that has a section on agriculture and food security, but it's not nearly as in-depth and driven by the sector itself as ours is. So our plan is called the Smart Agri Plan. You might have heard about it. And it's seen as a good example of what you can do when you have an integrated, holistic approach to this. And it was driven by the sector. So there was a lot of consultation with farmers, with the value chain, with extension, etc. And they suggested, what do we need to do about it? What are our responses? And what kind of support do you need from government? What kind of support do you need from within their own industry organizations? And what are the research needs and all of that? And so that brought together the Smart Agri Plan. And because it's not something that we thought up or the government thought up, it's rooted in reality. It's rooted in on-farm practice and what is achievable. It's not pie in the sky theoretical. So it's all things that probably are already happening, or the technologies are often already available, but it's just how do we integrate that? How do we coordinate it so that as a sector we move forward?
And so, again, another massive question. But okay, so you've been doing this for a long time. You are in government more recently, but you've been doing it for a long time. I would imagine that you've been seeing the signs of climate change and what's happening in the Western Cape for quite some time. Can you comment?
Yes. We knew back, I started working in this field 30 years ago. When I started working in 1992, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change had just been signed off and ratified, and South Africa was part of that. And so it suddenly became a real thing in terms of policy and government responses. But it was still very, very new on the ground. And we didn't have a lot of evidence back then. There was enough theoretical and some practical evidence from monitoring, obviously, climate change that something was changing. And the modeling was already so good, in fact, that the modeling that was done back then to say this is what our future is going to look like, if you look at that now and you look at what's actually happened in the last 32 years, it's actually really, really close. So the scientists were already getting it right back then, but there wasn't enough evidence to say it's definitely happening long term, it's definitely because of X, Y, Z, and so on. That has now emerged after 30 years. We've got the evidence, and there's absolutely no question now that, we know that, especially in the Western Cape, with the disasters, especially climate-related disasters, the last 10, 15 years, you can't miss the fact that we're getting more of these events. They're longer, they're more intense, they cause more damage, and across the world.
So climate change is a hot topic on many people's conversations. But what is signs of climate change? For the guy that he thinks, okay, right, I've put solar up on my roof, so I've saved a little bit of electricity. But what is climate change really? What if you've got to define climate change to somebody, what would you tell them?
So what we first tell them what it is not, is that it's not changeable weather. It's not weather from week to week or even from season to season. It's not the short-term variability that we know about and farmers respond to, obviously. But it is a long-term change. And it's a long-term change in a whole climate envelope. It's a whole average of conditions that are possible in a certain place. So in the Western Cape, say, for example, we have a Mediterranean climate system. We get colder, wet winters and dry, hot summers and so on. But we are seeing over time, and the models also say that, is that over time, over decades and over centuries, it's gradually getting warmer. The whole Earth is getting warmer, and that is absolutely irrefutable. There is so much evidence for that. But then our rainfall patterns are changing as well. So it's the climate systems, the drivers that, the frontal systems that come in the autumn and they start bringing our winter rainfall. Those things are shifting, and those are being measured by scientists to see whether the models and the measurements are the same. And they're pretty. Nothing, of course. We can't completely predict the future. There's no model that is correct. But it does give us a scenario, an indication of what the future could look like. And we use 80 different models. So we don't only stick with one model. We use different scenarios, different assumptions, and we say that this is the possibility of how this whole package of what happens over decades is shifting. And it's definitely shifting to warmer. So you might still have cold years. You might still have a really cold winter and some snow and stuff. That doesn't mean that climate change isn't happening. But so there's a gradual change. That's the one part of it. But normal people don't normally feel that. It's like the frog in the boiling water.
Yes.
We're adapting to it. It's becoming normal. Our kids, what they're experiencing now is for them normal. But it's for me, having grown up in Stellenbosch 40 years ago, is not normal because it was different then. So there's that gradual thing. But then there's the extremes as well. And I think most people would experience climate change now in the next in the last 10, 15 years, but also in the next 10, 15 years, more around how the extremes are changing. So we are certainly getting more deeper droughts. We're getting also more flooding, heavy rainfall, extreme rainfall, and breaking the records in terms of daily rainfall amounts. And we're seeing the flash flooding. I mean, just this week in the United States, we saw incredible, deadly flash floods.
Yes.
Some, areas like that are known to be prone to flash floods. Some of our river systems are known to be prone to flash flooding, but just the extent, just the volumes of rain that come and the damages is just so much more. Fires, we're getting more fires. There's a lot of data around that. More frequent fires and more intense fires. So there's a lot of things that are changing and and even things like pests and diseases. We're starting to see new things coming in little insects and diseases that are also responding to the changing climate, and there's a risk that we are getting new things in that then become adapted to our conditions. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a wonderful explanation, because it's such a, people throw around this word, but what does it actually mean? So thanks for that definition. And in the face of this massive challenge, how and what is government able to do?
Yes, that is difficult because government is under pressure. All governments across the board are under pressure to make promises around two things. The first is to reduce the extent of the problem. In other words, we call that mitigation. To deal with the causes of climate change, which we know what those causes are, and we know how to stop it. We actually do know how to stop it, but it's very, very difficult to shift that system from a carbon-intensive energy system across the world to a low-carbon energy system. It's becoming really, really hard to get that right. So governments know, and they've made commitments to do that, but it's going to take time, and it's not going to be the same for every country. For our country, it's particularly difficult. But they also know that there's going to be some level of change that we have to deal with and adjust to and adapt to. So that's adaptation. And the adaptation side is almost easier because many of the solutions around adaptation we actually know and we can implement, but we don't have the capacity. We don't have enough resources in government departments. We don't have the budgets because budgets are so constrained, under pressure. We have huge socioeconomic challenges that governments have to deal with. The city of Cape Town has to deal with municipalities on a short-term basis. Just service delivery is the main thing that government wants to deal with on 3 to 5 year cycles. And so the long-term stuff is getting left behind because Yeah. But the Western Cape government has prioritised climate change. And they are trying to resource and have a coherent strategy across all the departments where we identify what are the low-hanging fruit, things that we can or we have to do now already, and then what are things that we can do over time.
So when you hear government budget speak, you just hear billions and millions. And how many of that would, if I would say, right, Stephanie, I'm giving you a blank check now, and there's no end to the money, what do you think it would take to make a big impact, like immediately?
Yeah. Look, I'm going to just make
that's hypothetical.
A broad guess here because I haven't done the numbers. I don't think anybody's properly done the numbers. I'm just going to say Western Cape, not national. Okay, Western Cape. If you consider that the disasters that we've had in the last 10 years, on an annual basis in the last 2-3 years, the disasters have cost just the agricultural sector in the Western Cape easily 2 to 3 billion rand every year on damages.
Wow.
And we need to repair that. Now,
that was government cost.
That was it's infrastructure. It's rehabilitating the river systems that have been damaged. It's roads. It's infrastructure mainly. It's not counting what the farmers have lost.
Exactly.
If they've lost an orchard, it's their problem to replace it. So I'm not even counting that. It's billions. Now, that just to repair that, I mean, what we have to do is inject enough money to prevent those things from causing so much damage, and then to do even better at supporting our river systems, our ecosystems that are part of the problem that cause the damage, and building roads, bridges that are more resilient to what we're experiencing now and so on. And then there's a lot of things we have to do, but I would think that we're talking about billions, tens of billions for the Western Cape that would be needed. And obviously we don't have that kind of money. So there are efforts to try and attract climate finance from overseas. There are various sources of finance available now, increasingly very, very slow delivery of those tools or access to finance internationally. And, there are obviously other parts of this country, other parts of this continent that are in much worse dire straits than we are. And that the vulnerability of communities, of people, of municipalities is much, much higher than we have in the Western Cape, because the Western Cape is still pretty resilient in many ways compared to other parts.
Yes, indeed.
So, I mean, there's a lot of, when there is finance available, it's often first channeled into those areas that are seen to be much more vulnerable and in need of support. So, but we have put in proposals to try and access some of that international climate finance.
Sure.
It's real. It's here. It's an endless pit of money that we could throw into there, and you might still not be able to do anything. So I suppose the one thing that people can do is, as you said, adaptation. And what can farmers do about the impending problems? And as you say, in the last decade, the very clear damage that's being done to farmers. Is there anything?
Yeah, because farmers will just say, oh, it's another thing I've got to spend money on. It's another thing that's going to cost me X, Y, and Z.
That's true.
And they already, the margins on their farms are already very thin.
The margins are very, very tight. And we are one of the few places, certainly in the more developed part of the world, where the farming sector, the farmers do not get subsidies. I mean, if you compare to USA or EU, I mean, our farmers don't have any subsidies or any kind of financial support. So anything they want to do has to come out of their own pockets, their own investment. And that really, some smaller farmers who, smaller entities maybe just don't have that capital available. And it's hard to attract or to take on debt nowadays that you've got to pay back, and the risks are high.
Like a bridge is not going to pay itself back. A new orchard or a net or something might pay itself back in 2 or 3 seasons.
So that's right. That's what farmers are doing in the Western Cape. They are actually investing quite strategically, quite cleverly in technologies that are available, and they do their sums very carefully to see what the break even is going to be. If I invest in putting up net now or on an existing orchard, does it make sense? Or if I put it up with a new planting, a new orchard. Now, most of the farmers are doing that now, is when they put in a crop, they're already putting in the net from day one. But that is a very it's very costly. And so
Yes.
you
Yes.
need to know that you have a high value crop under that net. You need to know when your break even is, when that crop is going to start producing enough that you can start paying off your investment. And they've done the numbers, and the numbers are making sense now on netting. And that's why we're seeing so much netting going up.
A farmer that can afford netting and that, like you said, has got a high value crop underneath, it makes no sense to him. But an emerging farmer that's supplying a local community with vegetables and things like that, they do not have
It's
that
the
kind
same
of...
calculation. It's a business model where in your calculation of your yield and your profit, your prices, your profit, whatever you're growing, you need to be able to factor in whatever investment you want to put in. And I mean, my department has support to smallholder farmers. Our biggest program, in fact, is agricultural producer support and development, where farmers are supported to be establishing their new farming enterprises. And sometimes part of the business plan does include helping them to put up nets or helping them to put in drip irrigation. And all these adaptive technologies that are already available to the commercial sector. But you have to do a risk assessment of that particular farmer in his context or her context. What are the risks? And then sometimes it's justifiable financially to say, well, from day one you put in a drip, you put in whatever is needed. And so that's the way to go. Not everybody is going to need a net. Or it doesn't make financial sense. If you have, hectares and hectares of a low-value vegetable crop of cabbages or something, it's not going to make sense to put up a net. The other option is, of course, to go undercover, so you can put up greenhouses or whatever.
That's even more expensive.
That's even more expensive, but that is also highly capital intensive.
Yeah.
But the returns on that can be incredibly good, but you need the investment, and so it's not for small enterprises.
But like you've said now, okay, what we've spoken now, it's basically horticulture, it's fruit and vegetables. But the people with livestock, like you said, that you are now getting into that sphere of things, what are they doing? Or what can
livestock
they do?
is a little bit different. So our livestock species that we have in the Western Cape or in South Africa are generally quite capable of dealing with warmer temperatures. What they need is water and food. Now, the food side is sometimes direct. If they're grazing out in the Karoo, in the Bossies or whatever, your rainfall variability is going to affect the grazing amount and quality. So that's when there's droughts. Obviously, that affects your livestock directly through the food. Sometimes, if the livestock is being fed, like chickens or pigs, it's being fed something that is often maize-based or sorghum-based or whatever. And when those prices fluctuate, when there's been a shortage worldwide and the prices shoot up and down. And that is how they're going to be affected through feed prices. And sometimes, things like chicken, anything that's undercover in a house that needs to be cooled, your expense of and your risks of cooling that and so on. But I think what livestock farmers are doing already is just making sure they use breeds that are heat resistant. And that's why Nguni is so lovely and other even with sheep and goats, there are breeds that are adapted to our South African climate conditions and that do actually quite well even when it's hot out there, and that don't need a huge amount of water. And the problem with them is that they're often not as efficient in their breeding and their production in their growth and the age where you can take them to the abattoir and so on. So the business model is still it's a bit different, but there are risk strategies that farmers are using for, and then of course water, making sure that there's enough water places and maybe even shade. Now with extreme heat becoming a factor, people are talking about creating shade spots so that animals have somewhere to stay out of the sun.
Interesting.
Thank you. I have a question, and it takes us back to the drought of 2016-17 when Cape Town was talking about day zero for the human population. So, I mean, in the Western Cape, as everywhere else in the world, we have agriculture and then we have water for human consumption and use. We went through that. That time, I think, has left everybody not ever taking water for granted. We have been
We would hope.
Yes, we would hope. I certainly said at that time, I will never complain about rain again.
Remember from then till now, the half of Gauteng is down here as well. They've not experienced that.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a long question, but actually what it boils down to is I know it's not your department, but you might have knowledge of it. Are there plans for new dams, for new government dams, bigger dams, enlarging dams to help us with water security?
So the water question is interesting in the Western Cape. I mean, the water resource and the bigger planning is the domain of the Department of Water and Sanitation, National Department. And they've run a lot of scenarios around what in the Western Cape, what is still feasible in terms of increasing the water supply. The problem with our catchments is that we don't have any more opportunities for bigger dams. That the Berg River Dam was the last opportunity for a bigger dam, and that's been done. So the opportunities we have now, and they have quantified them, they are starting to implement in a sequence to make sure that we, over time, build up our water supply. There are smaller things they can do. For example, they extended the height of the canal, the feeder canal at the Brandvlei Dam. Another one is raising the wall at the Clanwilliam Dam. So creating more capacity just by raising a wall is one thing you can do. There are various opportunities to transfer water from adjacent catchments, so from the Brodie River system into the Berg River system, which then is available to the city of Cape Town. So transferring water through pipes and canals, and there's already a huge system of transfers going on, but there's still one or two options of taking even more water out of the Brodie system.
Okay.
Yeah, because a lot of water in the Brodie River that's just going to sea.
Well, that is something that people often say. We have to remember that in our water law, in the South African water law, it's actually a very progressive water act that we have in this country. Our ecosystem water needs are also very, very important. So it's human needs, it's needs for agriculture, and in fact, the ecosystem needs come before agriculture. Okay. So every river system has a minimum water supply that is needed, that must flow down that river and into the sea to keep that system healthy ecologically. And so unfortunately, some of that doesn't always remain in the system because our abstractions are too high sometimes. But yeah, we've got those three users, and there's a lot of competition between those three users. But I just want to come back to the question of what are the plans. There's also plans to use our groundwater, because we do still have opportunities for using groundwater. Not everywhere. Some areas are already using their maximum and shouldn't do more, but there are areas where there's still opportunity for, but it must be done in a scientific way, in a very managed way, so that we don't over-abstract and destroy the resource. So the City of Cape Town has got a groundwater project going to see where they can abstract out of the groundwater into the city's supply. So there's quite a few things that they're looking at. They're also looking at water recycling. So they've already repurposed one of the big water treatment plants in the city to be able to recycle water and put that back into the system. And there are going to be probably more plants that are going to be repurposed over time. And then they're looking at desalination as well. And of course, water demand management is one of the most important things. And you mentioned the drought. The city really, really learned, and the population and the users of the water really learned about water demand management during the drought. And those are lessons that we still understand. And it worked in the end. It worked because the demand management was effective.
Yes, indeed. And that's why I'm saying I think it was definitely... for lack of a better word, it was a watershed moment there. We actually did learn about actually conserving every little bit of water that you possibly can. Yeah. And we've been very blessed with good winters since then. In fact, some of them have been so good that they've been floods. So
there's been too much water.
Exactly. But I wanted to touch on with the desalination. I remember during the drought, there was talk of it, and then there was looking at it. And how feasible is that today? Is it still very expensive to do? Has the technology got cheaper? Are they really looking at that?
They are looking at it. And there's been a lot of lessons learned around that in other big cities around the world. And the City of Cape Town is in touch with those cities to see how it's done. The technologies have advanced. The big problem with it is that you need an energy source. And we've had energy issues, as we all know.
Yes, slight problem.
Which seems to be stable now, but it's still not great. We don't have an oversupply of energy that we can use for that. Okay. So it would take having to put up a big wind farm offshore somewhere, or some kind of a renewable energy source or off-grid source to run a desalination plant. And that makes it very expensive. So the water per litre becomes very expensive to the consumer. And it's not something that because I said there are other options. So using groundwater, recycling, all of those things, the water that comes out of that is more expensive than we have now coming from the river. But desal is at the end of that line. It's the most expensive.
Okay.
But over time, we are going to need it. And the city has accepted that over longer planning frameworks, we are going to need it. So when we've got to start planning for that now.
And if you look down the road, we've walked this 30 years since those models were.
What does the models say
Yes.
might happen in the next 10 years?
Well, the problem in the Mediterranean climate regions, including the Western Cape, but also we see it across the world where there's this kind of climate. The models for the future all agree that not only a warmer climate, but also a drier climate. So less rainfall during the rainy season from autumn to spring. And then the Western Cape, we are already seeing the reduction in rainfall in autumn. The data shows that quite clearly. We had a study commissioned by climatologists who showed us clearly that we're seeing a signal that is, we're fairly confident that the signal is that rain is coming later in autumn and the total in autumn is less. We're still getting our core winter rainfall, but over time, that seasonal rainfall, the models say, is going to go down, is going to decrease over time. Yeah.
So talking about models, and with the technology advancing as it is, have you guys brought in artificial intelligence into this to run these models, to see what could happen?
I'm not a modeler, but I'm pretty sure that this is already now being brought into that kind of work. And I know that in agriculture there's a lot of interest in AI, but in other sectors too. And I'm sure the water sector is looking very closely at that as well. But I can't say for sure.
It'd be interesting. I saw an article. I was actually at the ITGS and I read the article. I've since looked for it. I couldn't find it and that was like at the infant stages of like ChatGPT or whatever we use now. They said that they trained a model on 40 years worth of data and it could accurately predict 10-day weather happenings on a laptop, not even a supercomputer that they. Yeah. So it would be. I would be very curious to see what's going to happen with that.
So I think there's a huge gap still in supporting farmers with not the 30, 40, 50-year frame. I mean, we're pretty clear on what we're expecting in that frame, but the seasonal, the 2, 3, 5-year outlook on rainfall, and I think that's been a very difficult one to get right. So our seasonal forecasts or 2, 3-year forecasts haven't been all that good in the Western Cape, mainly because we also have a tricky climate system. But I think if we had to use AI, there's a good chance that we could really improve on what we call the skill. So how accurate is the forecasting that we can, as you say, you train it on a whole lot of data and you can get answers very, very quickly that would progress us in terms of the forecasting. Yeah.
Especially because there's a lot of long-term data available to be able to train something like that. I'm pretty sure there must be somebody doing it already.
We'll probably hear about it.
The problem with data is that data is being very, very tightly held by anybody who has it, including government. And government has, in the weather services and also in the Agricultural Research Council, the data that is available from the weather station network, basically going back, as long as we've had weather stations.
Yes.
That data is very tightly held and it's used as part of their business model to fund their operations, and so they sell it. So even us as government researchers have to buy the data from them. So not everybody has access. Not anybody can just open a laptop and have access to these data and use AI and be innovative. And we believe firmly, people in the space, the scientists believe firmly that data should be freely available. It's as a resource to anybody in this country. So that people with innovations like AI, that we can make progress, and we need all hands on deck to help us with this.
It will be a lot cheaper buying that data and fixing and getting proper forecasts than fixing half the Western Cape roads. I can't see it costing 20, 30 billion rand for that data versus what it could cost to.
It's a very relevant question. Stephanie, I want to ask you, what do you say to farmers about climate change? We've been hearing this word for 3 decades. Yap, climate change. But
and ozone layer.
But we are seeing it. We are seeing growers losing half their orchards. We are seeing incredible heat waves. What is your message to farmers?
Firstly, I just want to say that I've been talking to farmers about this for 30 years. And we are now in a position where I very, very seldom hear farmers say that they don't know it's happening on their farms, it's affecting them. Most of the farmers are completely on board with this is happening, and they're already making plans, they're already adapting to it and so on. But I sometimes I feel uncomfortable talking about long-term climate change quite often, because farmers want to know, what am I going to do now, next 5 years, how am I going to stay profitable? That's the main question. And for that, I think it makes more sense to talk about climate risk. So when you start engage farmers about what are your risks on your farm? What are the kind of things that can happen to you, that have happened to you, that you're worried about, and what can we do about that? Being very, very pragmatic, very practical, and helping them to devise a risk strategy. What am I going to do if my water's gone for 2 years? What am I going to do if I get a heat wave? How can I protect my crops? Just be very, very practical about it, and don't get into arguments about, that really don't help anybody.
And over the 30 years that you've dealt with this, and yet you spoke, I must just imagine that the very first time you spoke to farmers about this 30 years ago, they must have looked at you. This is a
I remember that
crazy
day very
scientist.
clearly.
Please tell us about
my very
that.
first presentation. I just started at the University of Stellenbosch in the Department of Horticultural Science, working for the fruit industry, and because I came with the experience around climate change from my previous job at Kirsten. I was asked to give a presentation to what was then the Cape Pomological Association. They're not called that anymore. Now it's Horticultural Science, and
Yes.
But they started as the Cape Pomological Association. And we used to meet either in a hotel in Cape Town or in the Endler Hall in Stellenbosch. And I remember very clearly it was just a few months after I started my new job, I was asked to talk about climate change. And this was a new topic in agriculture. And I remember distinctly, and I was a young researcher. I mean, back then we didn't have the evidence and the knowledge that we have now, but I did my best with the knowledge that we had. And I gave my presentation, and there were a few people afterwards, people that I knew personally as well, who said, I'm not so sure about that. But they didn't fight with me, but I could see that, So we passed that stage now, but it's taken 30 years.
Sure.
We have so passed that stage. And for a long time, interestingly, we just... last year, we did a video production about findings of a study done in the Brodie River Valley.
About food security.
About food security. And they asked farmers at the beginning of the study, which I think is 2020 or 2021, what was a bigger risk to them? Was it market security or climate change? And they all said market security. And when they went back 3 years later to go and get the evidence, gather all the evidence, a lot of the farmers said, actually, hold that thought. It's actually climate change. So within a 3-year period,
It's changed.
The evidence up close and uncomfortably personal, they definitely saw climate change is the bigger problem.
We've almost been in a good position for a very quick change in perceptions that was driven by the drought and driven by the floods that have come since then.
And the big fires.
And take all of that together. And for some farmers, it's also been hail and diseases and other things. And taking all of that together in quite a short time period, that has really triggered a much bigger acknowledgement and
you can call it the perfect storm.
Yes, and literally, as you say, it all happened kind of within a very short period of time, and no one can deny it now.
No, you can't.
So when you meet new people, like if you go, I like to ask people this: if you go to somebody new's house that you've just met, and there's a whole group of people that you've never met before, and you start telling them about what you do, because obviously people say, well, what do you do? What do you do? Firstly, what do you tell them? And then secondly, what is their reaction?
I'm very upfront about what I do. I have absolutely no scaamte, was that? I work on climate change, but I'm also a crop scientist. I'm a researcher. I've done research on farms, in orchards, dealing with, helping farmers to understand sunburn, what to do, very practical. So I'm not just a climate scientist or modeler in terms of, long-term projections.
Yes.
I work with farmers on the ground. And so I tell them what my experiences have been with farmers. But I'm careful. I first like to gauge, where people are coming from. And I don't like to, I'm not a I'm not someone who likes arguments or,
Yes,
or
yes, yes.
You know, so I don't want to get into arguments with anybody because in a short period of time, you're not going to change their minds.
Yeah, because they read
No.
something on Facebook last week about.
But maybe you can say something that triggers their interest, and if they're receptive to it, they can, you can follow up with this discussion. But I tend not to try and offload too much information because I sit with so much information now. But and it's very easy to just offload it onto somebody and just completely flood them and overwhelm them. And people get anxiety and they become defensive because they become fearful, and that's the last thing I want to. So I just say, look, this is what we do. We're supporting the farmers, and I tell them about some of the good things that with adaptation we're actually doing pretty well in the Western Cape. And if I feel that there's some people that are skeptical, and then I listen to them, and but I don't try to, especially if you get a sense if somebody is really embedded in their skepticism. And they start talking about where they get their information, and I know that that's misinformation, it's not true, but I can't start arguing that at that point. So I just say, look, let's just stick with climate risk, climate variability. It's becoming more difficult to farm. Will you agree with me on that? And we want to pass on our farming to our next generation, to your children, their grandchildren. Don't you want the best for them in terms of leaving them something that is healthy and profitable? And so we can do things that are good for production, that are good for profitability, but that also make us more resilient to climate stresses. And nobody will argue with that. And they're already probably doing it themselves. They've already done things without knowing it that is actually climate adaptation. Just to... That's what farmers do. That's what they've always done.
Boer maak 'n plan. They have to.
Without climate change. You're always responding. Exactly. You're always responding to stuff, and they're already doing it. They just don't know it's climate change response, and so you don't have to go into that detail.
Okay, you mentioned something earlier, and I want to go back to that. You spoke about the Western Cape's Mediterranean climate. That also makes us unique in South Africa. So we have our own set of challenges which are different to the rest of the world. We have our own set of challenges which are different to the rest of the world. What is happening in Mediterranean climates elsewhere in the world? You mentioned that the model says hotter and drier. Is it happening?
It's
So sorry about that.
Let's just quickly find. Jy moet gou goed kyk waar hulle boor nie. Net hoor. Klink dit of buite is of binne?
Sorry about this.
No worries. Things happen.
They do.
They are still busy building a lot of the offices. So
I will ask you that question again, and then we just go on from there. Let's just see. It might be that they literally have to make 2 holes and they're done.
Yeah. Now I've made a marker on the thing so I can find it and we'll just trim it out.
Shall we carry on?
Oh.
Okay.
Okay, it's fine.
Let's just try.
Yeah.
Let's hope for the
Be
best.
hopeful.
Okay. So Stephanie, I asked you, tell us about the Western Cape has a unique climate, and we are unique in South Africa with that climate. But there are other places in the world. You were saying that the modeling says we're going to get hotter and drier. Is that happening elsewhere in Mediterranean climates?
Yes. And in fact, it's happening consistently across all the regions that have a Mediterranean climate, all 5 continents. So, in fact, the greatest rate of warming at the moment is in the Mediterranean countries in Europe and North Africa, around the Mediterranean basin. They are having horrendous rates of warming, much higher than us or California or Chile or Australia. But all of these regions are experiencing heat waves, much bigger fires, and I mean, look at California, but Australia as well, and Chile, terrible fires. We've also had our share of more fires here. And of course, drying. So some of the droughts in those areas have been as bad as ours. So yes, it's happening everywhere. We are now in a good position to work with those countries. I don't know if you've heard of the Mediterranean Climate Action Partnership.
No.
I'd love to tell you about it.
Please do.
So about 2 years ago, there was a drive for the Mediterranean countries, specifically with regard to climate change, to form a partnership and to start working together. And that came to fruition with the signing of this Mediterranean Climate Action Partnership with 16 founding member countries. It's not countries, it's sub-regional governments, right? So regional governments that
Like
have
the Department
like
of-
us,
like
in the
the
Western
Western
Cape,
Cape. Okay.
yes. And our DDG, Dr. Ilse Trautmann, went to COP 28, it was then, in Dubai, end of 2023, to sign on behalf of the Western Cape government. So our province is one of the founding members. They had a first meeting of all the Leadership Council in Barcelona last year. And this year we actually hosted the whole group in Stellenbosch in May
Oh, wow.
for a whole week.
Wow.
Wow.
And
We knew about that.
So
We could have done
16
it.
been there.
In fact, I
Yes.
think 12 of the partner sub-regional governments came to Stellenbosch. It's led by California and Catalonia in Spain.
Yeah.
And then, we hosted it, and it was so rewarding. And we took them on a full-day field trip into the mountains, and we showed them what our risks are and what we're doing about it. And we had very good discussions. So that partnership is now, and the beauty of that partnership is that in climate change, it's very unusual for a grouping like that to be based on a common climate and a
Yes.
common climate future and common risks. So it's very biophysical rather than just political, or just our countries like each other, or we developing countries, but our climates are so different that it really makes no sense. So we are now working with countries who are having the same issues, and we're trying to build combined or share our resources, our knowledge, and there's going to be even real actual projects that are, in fact, there's 3 projects that were launched in May when we had it here, of which the Western Cape is part of all 3 of those projects, together with other regions.
Sure.
And the big focus areas that were decided is drought, and the Western Cape is the chair of the drought working group on that, and wildfire and extreme heat. So we are now actioning real, tools, things that can really make a difference on the ground with this MCAP. And hopefully the MCAP it's a 3-year project at the moment, but the Secretariat is really on to try, and it's all funded by philanthropic organizations overseas, and so it's not dependent on government money. And we're going to showcase the results of the partnership over the last 2 years at next COP in Brazil, end of the year. I'll be going for that as well, me and my partner, my colleague, Dr. Asa Peterson. And after that, we're going to try and justify that we need at least another 3 years of it to keep the partnership going, because it's been a wonderful sharing of expertise, and it's mainly government directors, people who have real decision-making powers that are in that leadership council. But also, we're bringing in the researchers, the academic partners to support us, because we want it to be science-based and to do that
Fascinating.
comparison across the regions as well.
Incredible.
It's very exciting, yeah.
And I can imagine that working together, unity is strength. So if you're working with people that have the same challenges all around the world, and it might be different countries, but it's non-political, it's climate.
Exactly.
You
And
don't
it
have to
must
look in the
be-
taxpayers' eyes for
It
money.
Yes.
must be incredible.
And the politics at national level, with the global national, the COPs and all of that, it's taking too slow. It's too slow. It's
Yes.
too political. It's so politicized that there's been an acknowledgement that if the regional governments and city governments are actually the place where things are going to happen and are already happening. So there's also a coalition of cities around the world that Cape Town is part of.
Oh, wow.
Where city governments are working together to say, what can we do? And so that's where everything is going to happen. And it doesn't matter how long I'm saying this with a pinch of salt, but the global processes are just taking too long, and they're being, the problem with the global processes is that one country can have a veto right on agreements of what we need to do, and that has been consistently happening, where certain countries with vested interests just veto, and just block, and that's why we're not making enough progress. And so we can get around that by saying, well, no, we're going to go down to province or state level and city level, and that's where things are going to happen.
Wonderful to hear that is happening. Again, something else which is unique to the Western Cape I want to ask you about, and that is, until now we've been talking about farmers and people, and we touched on ecosystems, but the Western Cape is home to the fynbos biome.
I was thinking about the fynbos.
The fynbos
5 minutes
biome,
ago.
Yes.
and how, again, massive question, very broad, but over the 30 years, how's the fynbos doing?
To be honest, fynbos is incredibly resilient. But having said that, that doesn't mean that we're not going to have species losses.
Yeah.
There will be species losses. There will be ecosystems that take strain. Not everywhere. There will be a core fynbos area that will still get its winter rainfall, and where there are enough big populations and it'll keep going. But on the margins, and especially looking up the west coast, the fynbos extent going up the Cederberg and the northern parts of the Cederberg, and where we're finding the arid climate moving southwards, and that is the area where possibly we might start seeing changes in our ecosystem functioning more quickly. We have a very good science basis in South Africa, in the Western Cape, around trying to understand how fynbos, how species are going to respond to climate change. In fact, we were, world leaders, in fact, on this topic, because we have such a high biodiversity. It made sense to start working on that, and so we have a fairly good knowledge around what to expect. So it's not. Yes, there will be species losses, but there will be system functioning losses as well, or changes.
Yeah.
And we might see more fires in some systems, and just try and manage that in a way that we can still conserve the essence of that system. Water obviously is another one. And then key species, sometimes they're called keystone species, like pollinators, they look like tiny little things, but they play such an important role in the system, because they pollinate, and they only pollinate certain things and not others. And with the warming that's happening and the changes, the plant that's being pollinated is evolving differently to the thing that's pollinating, the insect. And so there's going to become these disjunct, these mismatches, and the pollination success will be compromised. Our Cape honeybee, incredibly important for not only our ecosystems, our fynbos, but also for the farmers who use that species for farming. And if we don't have the honeybee, we probably lose about half of our agricultural production. So these are things that people are looking at quite closely. It is concerning.
Well, it's been incredibly interesting talking about all these things. My head is spinning with all the stuff you've mentioned. Is there any particular message you have for people that you'd like to say, look, be aware of this, or take care of this? Or I know we've spoken a lot, but maybe that you have something that you'd like to share.
I think in the Western Cape, our main message is to stay vigilant and responsible around water use. We have constrained resources. We have incredible demands on our limited water in the Western Cape. The water is not going to become more. It's actually it could if we have enough investment in those alternative sources. But water is going to become contentious, because agriculture needs it, people need it, and so on. So just being really responsible with water use, and that goes for farming and urban. Everybody. We're all part of it. I also think that people must become more risk aware in their places where they live, their communities. With increased fires in some of our communities, increased flooding. I mean, we kind of know where the hotspots are. And for people to be proactive in their own communities, to protect themselves, to protect their families and their communities. So that's another thing. And I think not being fearful, because we actually do know how we can become more resilient. We do have solutions and technologies, but we need everybody on board. We need people to come on board and be part of it and find solutions. We need young people to bring their innovations, AI, whatever it is they can bring that is new, that can help us solve this problem. I think the next generation is going to have a lot on its hands. If we don't deal with it now enough, they're going to have a much harder time of it. And that really worries me. So I think my generation we really have a responsibility. I don't think we can say that the generation caused it, but we could have and should have done more, I think, maybe to...
But also you didn't know.
We didn't, and by the time we knew, it became it's become so politicized that many people just say, well, what can I do about it? But I think it also starts with small things like waste management, not wasting food. Food is going to become even more precious. If we don't want food prices to go up and beyond people's pockets and means, we need to be aware of where our food comes and how, what it takes to produce that food and not to waste it. I think little things that people can do. Yeah.
The youngsters, I must say that I've got young kids still, and I've been involved in some of the schools in my previous photography career, is that I think the youngsters are very aware of this. they all want to make a difference. That's a big thing. They only their thing is they want to make a difference, but I don't think they know how and where. And I think most of the people that come into the system that's doing well finds out when they go to university, when they get to meet people like yourself in these kind of things. Then they say, well, a lot of the people that the youngsters in agriculture, those that were lucky enough to go to university, they happened to stumble upon agriculture while they were there. It was never on their radar. And I think it might be the same with these kind of things.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion. We need to get more young people involved on like a school level already.
Absolutely. It isn't school curriculum, but it could be.
Now you've got to
could be delivered in a much better way. I think the teachers are not properly trained and resourced to deliver it in the correct way. We really need to do more. Yeah.
Yeah, if I've got to help my youngster with the exams, I look at the info that they're giving and I said, well, it actually doesn't work like this, but we need to learn it like it stands
Yeah. I also worry about where youngsters are getting their information.
Yeah.
So we have been working with youngsters in the last 3 years. We have a Climate Change and Agriculture Youth Summit. We've had it for 3 years running now with 100 young people, 18 to 35 years old. And from that, we do a survey. And from that, we can see that most of them are getting their information on social media. And that is a real concern because there is so much disinformation out there. They're getting confused. They're getting the wrong message. They get becoming despondent and all the wrong things. So we really need them to be exposed to reality, real science-based, and what is happening on the ground in government. Not some of the outlandish things and conspiracy theories that you see out there, and that really worries me. But I think most of the youngsters we had at our summits, I think, were switched on enough to know how to use it responsibly, information, and also where to find. Most of them are graduates, to where to find reliable, trustworthy information. But there are many youngsters out there who don't know, who haven't been shown that, how do you find trustworthy information, who do you speak to? And I think that worries me.
The downside of freedom of speech is that everybody, it gives the village idiot a soapbox.
But I must say that there's one thing that everybody can and should do. We all have a vote.
Yeah.
And I'm not politicizing the whole thing now. I'm not going to say what party I think they're all not doing enough or talking about it enough. But to hold our councillors, our voted politicians accountable and to say that, why aren't you talking about this more? What are you doing? Every person, once they get to 18, has a vote. They can do that.
I wish that all governments, and people have got their own opinions about the American government, what's happening there. But one thing that they've done is they've made everything transparent. They've opened up. And I see certain departments in our government starting to do that, opening it up so that show like what we're doing, long form conversations about what it is, what's happening in the budget meetings.
Yeah.
Open it up so that everybody can see, because then they can start holding them account for it. Because if you just read a little paragraph like that in a newspaper, 3 weeks later it doesn't help you at all.
Yeah, it's an easy thing. Once the ministers in the Western Cape province will have to give their budget speeches. The budgets are openly available.
Yeah.
Go and look at it.
But now they're
and find out, what are you spending your money on?
And they're putting it on social media for the world to see, which is fantastic.
But engage with it.
Yeah.
And you have a right to question it and to say, I want to see more of XYZ. That's your right as a voter.
Very important message, because people are busy with their lives and they should stop and take note of what's happening around them if they want change.
Exactly. Don't just switch off and then just complain.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's not going to work.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Thank you so much. It's been so interesting. We have a closing tradition on our podcast, and it's quite fun. One of the previous people that we've had on the podcast anonymously leaves a random question for the next person.
Oh.
And we'll ask you for one just now as well. So Dewald is going to fish out a question for you. And there's no right or wrong answer. There's only your answer.
Okay.
So.
Okay, here's a good one. Which is more important? doing the right thing for the wrong intention, or doing the wrong thing for the right intention?
Oh, what a question.
Ooh, that's difficult, eh? Okay, doing the wrong thing
For the right
for the
intention.
right intention.
Or the right thing for the wrong intention.
That's a really
Oh,
hard
that's
one.
hard. I'm a very law-abiding person, but I would say that the intention is really important.
Yeah.
You've got to do it for the right intention. You've got to have your heart in the thing. You've got to be honest and have your heart in it. And then sometimes, I'm not saying anybody's going to break the law, but what is the wrong thing anyway? Who decides what's wrong? You know, you might just have a different idea of how things should be done in innovation that people say, oh, no, we've never done it like this, that's wrong. No,
Yeah.
there might be a better way of doing it, as long as it's within the law. So that's my answer.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And we always joke and say it's always easier to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission.
Sometimes that is true, yes. That's, yeah.
Well, it's quite a philosophical one. We can go a long way down the road with this one.
Yeah.
Stephanie, thank you so much.
Yes.
It's been incredibly interesting and inspiring and great to hear about all the good things that are happening, and that it's not just a lost cause. There is a lot we can do. And thank you for doing what you do, and thanks for joining us.
Yes. And
Yeah, it's a pleasure, thank you.
hopefully we will have you on more.
Yes, absolutely, thank you.
Thanks so much.